My name is Connie Clark. Today is August 22nd, 2018. We're at the law offices of Dodson, Parker, Behm, and Caparella in Nashville, Tennessee. This interview of Margaret Behm is being conducted for the Nashville Bar Association Oral History Project. Margaret, it's fun to be with you here today, and I have a lot of questions to ask you.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you.
Let's just start at the top, and that's with your background. So if you'll just tell us your full name, your date and place of birth, anything about your birth family, particularly parents and grandparents.
I'm Margaret Louise Behm. I am named after both my grandmothers. I'm very proud of that. I was born on August the 12th, 1951 in Canastota, New York. My parents met in Berlin, and my mother was there after the war, and she was the secretary to the Allied commander. So she had a lot of power. She could determine what passes were given in Berlin. My dad was head of the commissary, so during the Berlin airlift, you know, when they didn't have any food there, he was important in that effort, and he was also in charge of the alcohol. So they met, they fell in love, and moved to New York. And after a year, my mother was ready to come home to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So after a year, I started living in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. 11 months after I was born, my sisters were born, twin sisters, in Murfreesboro. So my mother had 3 babies within a year. So after having worked on the Manhattan Project and been in Europe and being such a free spirit, she was a mom with 3 babies. And my mom and dad lived in Murfreesboro for our entire life. I went to high school there. My dad ended up being a healthcare executive. That's what he was when he passed away. And Murfreesboro was a tremendous place to grow up as a child.
I think we see a theme already of strong women doing important things, and I'm sure we'll see that as we go along. But I do want you to tell me 1 or 2 more tidbits about your mother and the career that she had in Murfreesboro and what some of her bosses, including judges, had to say about her.
Well, she was an amazing woman. She died in 2000, and what her bosses said, because she became a legal secretary, was that she was really the lawyer in the office. And she was amazing. She, at a time when you didn't have copiers, she could just sit down and type a will from memory. All of the clauses and fancy kind of language she used, because obviously when someone came into the office and they needed a change, you had to sit down and they had to wait, and she would type it up all over again. But she was an extraordinary woman, and very well versed in the law, loved the law. She worked principally with Whitney Stegall and Dick LaRoche in the law firm of Stegall and LaRoche. And that's where I got my interest in law, going up there after school with my French horn, walking to downtown from Central High School, and watching how law office worked, and watched how people treated the lawyers and how grateful they were to lawyers for helping them out. And that was my real first impression of being a lawyer. Of course, they were all men, but my mom was running things, so that was a good impression too.
So tell me a little bit more about your childhood, growing up with twin sisters, and what was going on in the community.
Well, my sisters are great. They're identical twins, and they were very devoted to each other. And sometimes people say to me, Margaret, how did you get interested in politics? And I say, well, because it was always 2 against 1, and I had to figure out how to get my way. That was really true in our household. Very, very smart women. One is a nuclear pharmacist who has a PhD pharmacokinetics from Michigan, the first woman to get that. Another one is an engineer and has an MBA, and they both teach in community colleges now in Oregon. are exceptional teachers, and I'm very proud of them.
Where did you go to school, and what activities were you involved in there?
I went to the campus school in elementary school. My mother made sure that she put me on the waiting list at campus school. It was a public school, but it was a school for professor at MTSC at the time, college, and then university, where they sent their kids. So we had 35 kids in each grade, and I got to go to campus school. And because I got to go to campus school, my sisters got to go to campus school. So it's a school 1 through 8. We had lots of student teachers, lots of innovative teaching. I took shop, art. We had a band when I was in 5th grade through 8th grade with the band instructor out of MTSU who actually did the marching band for the college and university. We had exceptional teachers, and it was a great place to be. And then I went 2 blocks away from that to Central High School after that, and went there for 4 years, and we were busting at the seams. We had over 400 in our class, and that's why they started out with Oakland and Riverdale and all these schools afterwards, because Murfreesboro was growing so much. But being in a town where there are so many people who are professors and educated, Murfreesboro was a terrific place to grow up, and it had terrific community leaders, civic engagement. It was a great way to see what a community can be like as a kid.
And so you finished high school in Murfreesboro. Where did you go to college? How did you choose, and what happened there?
Well, in high school, I did well, like most lawyers do. You do well in high school. And I was a really good French horn player. And I had never taken any lessons. I just had some talent. My dad was really talented musically. My dad had graduated from Syracuse, and he thought I should go away to college. My mother, having 3 children, and we weren't rich or wealthy by any imagination, just typical middle class family, said I was staying in Murfreesboro because we had 3 girls to go to college. And so I thought Murfreesboro, I had kind of done Murfreesboro, so I needed to go away to college. But I had these 2 scholarship offers if I would play French horn. And that's really not what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to be a music major. So I got a scholarship to UT in the band, but then I also got an academic scholarship. So my dad said, if you go up there, there was, I don't think the interstate was even finished at that time, so it was like a long way away. If you go to UT, I'll help you out, you get a job, you've got these scholarships. So I was thrilled. So I went to the Big Orange Country and loved it. It was big, I needed big. I wanted to go to a big school, and never took my band scholarship, and just went to see Dr. Julian and said, I know I got here because of the scholarship, but I don't want to be in the band. Kind of embarrassed about that, but it got me up there to UT, which was a great choice for me.
Well, not taking the scholarship gave you a little extra time to do other
Right.
things. So talk a little bit about what went on in college. Who were your friends? What were your outside activities? What courses did you love or hate?
Well, I had dated a guy named David Bragg, who's now a judge, and I wanted to room with a girl who went with me to high school, and her dad worked with Representative John Bragg, who was David's brother. So he called up to UT and got us to be roommates. He was head of the finance committee, so that was, I guess, easy for him.
People took his telephone calls.
But we, in order to do that, we had to go to the out-of-state dorm, and that was Hess Hall, and that was the first co-ed dorm in 1969 at UT. So co-ed only in that I mean, all the girls were in the dorm, but on one side, and the boys were on the other side. But we had urinals in our bathrooms. I mean, we were definitely trying to figure out how to coalesce, but there were always boys down in the lobby because we were all living together in the lobby. And it was great. So there was only, like, there were 50 people on their floor, and there were maybe 4 people from Tennessee. So when I went to Tennessee, I went out of state, essentially. And all my friends were from Miami, New York, New Jersey. They were all over the place. And they had come to Tennessee because it was ranked in some magazine as the best party school. So it was quite a great year. But at the same time, there was all this turbulence going on. And you know, in 1968, Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and Robert Kennedy, and so the civil rights movement was going on. The Vietnam War was going on. Our guy friends were being drafted, and so, you know, you sat there and wondered when your birthday, if you were a guy, sat there through the draft, whether you had been drafted. The drinking age changed because they were all being drafted from 21, you know, to 18. And for me, a seminal moment was when we had a walkout because guys had women had hours and had to be in at midnight, and guys did not. And you know, I was really very all about doing what I was supposed to do. I did well in school. I did, you know, I followed the rules and goody two shoes. And I get up to Tennessee and in college, and I don't think this is right. I think the guys are causing the trouble and not us. So, you know, they need the hours and not us. If anybody had hours, but obviously nobody needed hours. We were adults. So there was a grassroots movement, and we all met at Circle Park. There were about 400 or 500 women. And then the deal was you were supposed to come in late and get written up. So I was going to have to get written up and go through the judicial process. And so, but what happened, you know, in participating in that, is that while you're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with this procedure, UT decides to throw out the hours because they didn't want to process all of the judicial complaints. And I just had this incredible moment of, oh my gosh, if you just organize people against something that is wrong, and it's not from the top down, that's not how this happened. It was from the bottom up. You know, sometimes you can really make change, and that was a really, really important time for me.
And I can see how that might carry on for the rest of your life. Did you work at any kind of job while you were in undergraduate school?
Yes, I mean, that was what I needed to do, and that was okay with me. And so I became head resident quickly in the dorms, and then I became assistant head resident. And so that was able to pay my tuition and pay for my, you know, bills and food and residence hall. And I did that all the way through law school because I went to UT Law School.
Well, that moves us into the next question. Where did you go to law school, and why did you decide to go there?
Well, I did not go to college to get married, whereas that's what a lot of my friends did.
The MS degree. Is
right, right. And that's what we were, that's really was our way, our pattern, our way to go through life was to go get your college degree, be able to be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher so that you can do something until you got pregnant, at which point you would probably not work, or maybe you couldn't work, as in the case of teachers. Some teachers couldn't work when they were pregnant. And then you would just take care of the home. But I got involved in college with the Dean of Women. They had not had one before, but I was really becoming a feminist in college, and she showed me this, she came up to our dorm room and she showed this kind of a ruler, and it said, okay, you're here, and that was 20, and you're going to live here, that's about 80, and you'll get married here, because women, the average age was 20 or 21. Then you'll have all your children here. They'll be like 30. You'll have them all by then. They'll go to school. And then she said, well, what are you going to do between 30 and 80? Like, that was like a half a century. Like, I'm sitting there and I'm 20 and I'm going, what am I going to do for 50 years? But nobody had ever suggested that to me. So by the time I had gotten through college, I pretty well, I knew that I wanted to do more with my education than get married and do those jobs. So I had a good friend, Wendy Goggin, who her name was Wendy Hildreth at the time, and we don't know which one of us, we were both assistant head residents, came up with the idea first, but one of us said to the other, let's go to law school, the other one said, okay. That was it. And so we applied, and we both remained assistant head residents at UT Law School. We were fortunate to get in, and we just stayed with our jobs and went to law school.
During your time in law school, what professors or what courses were the most meaningful to you? And maybe there are some that you still wonder why you had to take them.
Well, I'm such a typical law student. The first day of law school, look to your left, look to your right, one of you won't be here. So, but I obviously wanted to make sure I didn't flunk out. But I didn't really like my first year very much. It was very difficult, hard, new language. And so I can't really name anybody the first year. It was such a process. But later on in law school, I more subscribed to, I took what I needed to take, but two experiences. One was legal clinic was just huge for me, actually doing the practical kind of law that we did, and I really did like serving low-income people and, being an advocate. I really learned through that process that I liked being an advocate. And then I decided to come to Nashville and be a legislative intern when the legislature was in session. And that was amazing. 4 law students, we came here. Governor McCorder was speaker. Ray Blanton was governor. I sat and watched the House every day, and I wrote legislation. And that was a real eye-opener to me as to how things worked at the Capitol. And so Grayford Gray was the professor who was in charge and made that happen, essentially. And actually, as a result of that, because of the job I took later, which we'll talk about, legal services, I really realized that solutions or solving problems were not just all about lawsuits, that there were other ways to solve problems, and that was really helpful to me in my present love of public policy, politics, and who's in office and what a difference they make.
And before we continue to the beginning of your law career, I'll digress for just a moment and ask you at this point to talk about your immediate family now. When did you get married? Tell us about your husband, your children, anything you want us to know.
Well, I have the best husband in the whole wide world. I'm wildly in love with him. His name is Harlan Dodson. I often say that, and he agrees, that we had thunderbolt when we saw each other. It was like an amazing thing. I loved his energy and his humor, the way he looked, the way he thinks. We can thank my mother for that, because my mother had left the law office I had told you about and gone to work at Hooker, Keeble, Dodson, and Harris, a great law firm. The Dodson and that firm is his dad, Harlan Dodson, my father-in-law, great lawyer too. Mm-hmm. And they had this incredible library, and the best library in the state, really. They wanted it to be that, and so Harlan loved that library. And every year they have a Christmas party, just like we still carry on this tradition at our law firm of having a community firm lawyer friends Christmas party, and they would have that, and it was a big deal, and everybody came. And that's where I first saw him. I was up there, my mother said, come on up. I was a law student. I was, of course, scared to death. I wasn't going to know anybody. I go anyway because she told me to, and saw him, met him for the first time. And as a result of that, he would ask about me from time to time, and I was his law clerk. He gave me a job to do while I was in UT, and he paid $4 an hour. I'll never forget that. It was so much money. And I had to go to the bankruptcy court, and he was blown away because I actually couldn't find what happened and went and asked the judge what happened.
It must
and I
work
found out
fine.
what happened, and the judge told me, and he got the court reporter to give me the tape, and it was an incredible report. But, I was like nervous because I liked him, but I didn't know he liked me, all that kind of stuff. So he's asking my mother what my plans are. And she says, I want to come to Nashville. But, I was having difficulty finding a job for all the reasons that things were difficult back then. And so he learns that I'm interested in legal services. And he knows Ashley Wiltshire. And Ashley Wiltshire was the director, and he'd already sent me a rejection note. He calls Harlan, and Harlan tells him to hire me. And he sends me another letter and says, you have a good advocate, Harlan Dodson, come interview with me. And I got the job. And that's how I got to Nashville. And then it took Harlan and I 3 or 4 more years to finally get together. And we married in 1981. And we have 2 wonderful children who we named after ourselves, Harlan and Margaret, so it's easy to remember their name. And Margaret is the 4th Margaret. And she's also named after both her grandmothers. And she finally figured out she should be a lawyer. And after going to the University of Georgia and going to D.C. and having a great career in D.C., she's now at Bass, Berry & Sims. And my son Harlan he went to Williams, and he has been a basketball coach and a teacher, government and economics teacher, and he just moved back with his wife, and he is teaching at MBA, and Margaret's married to a wonderful man, Behm, who works at McNeely, Piggott & Fox. So I'm in a sweet spot in my life right now.
Yes, you are.
Both my kids are here. They married great people, and Harlan's wife is a clinical psychologist with a emphasis on autism, and she has a fellowship with the Vanderbilt Triad program, so they are doing great.
Did you recommend to Margaret that she become a lawyer or go to law school, or did she find that herself?
She says she learned it when she was working with AT&T in D.C., and that's when she realized it was important to be a lawyer. So I don't think her parents, I don't know what influence we had on that. She probably knew what it was like. But
well, one more question on that score. When Margaret was sworn in to the Tennessee bar, what did you accomplish that nobody else had ever accomplished before in terms of being able to introduce her and swear her in?
Oh, yes. Well, there was a rule that that if your parent introduced you, their name would go on your certificate. Mm-hmm. But what happened with Margaret was she had 2 parents, and she wanted both of them to introduce her. And so we were able to change that both people could go on the certificate, because that was kind of hard for her to determine which parent would introduce her. So that was good.
Well, let's move back now to what happened when you left law school. Tell us about taking the bar, your job search, and what were the issues and impediments then?
Well, when I went to law school, we were really the first class in which there were a significant number of women. For instance, in our class, maybe there were 150 people who were admitted, and there were 25 of us. previous class maybe 10, you know, previous class maybe 5. So we were really the first wave of maybe a significant number of women coming out. And I did not want to stay in East Tennessee. I wanted to come back to Middle Tennessee. And Vanderbilt really had a great stronghold here in this community with its grads getting jobs. And firms like Harlan's firm was a big firm, and it had 10 people. So it was very, very different. And so I had 2 big problems here. I was a woman, and I was not a Vandy graduate. And then on top of that, the third problem was I didn't have anybody who was family or in business, or someone who could say, you know, I'm in this big business, or I'm in this bank, or I'm in this industry. Would you please hire my daughter? You know, you do my legal work. So there was no inroads for me to be here, and that's why I was so grateful that Legal Aid would take me on. But the legal community was so different then. You know, particularly for women. I'd say maybe 3% of the women, of the lawyers at that time in Tennessee, made up of women. And we could not, rarely were we in private practice. I mean, you were one of the first women to be in private practice in Nashville. And
there weren't many jobs available for women.
There weren't many jobs available at all. And we all knew each other. We called ourselves, I think you were 78 grad, is that right?
79.
79. Well, we were the 76ers, and we knew exactly who was coming out right then. And it was Aleda Trauger, Susan McGannon, Claudia Bonneman, Marietta Shipley, Barbara Haynes. I mean, you could just look around and you knew who everybody was. We couldn't join the Cumberland Club. We couldn't join the City Club. We couldn't join Rotary. We couldn't join Exchange Club. The YMCA downtown was closed to us. There was one woman judge, and that was Sissy Daughtry, who was appointed to the appellate bench in 1975. So, but you know, when you came in 1976, the jobs that were available were you did family law, you did estate planning. That's what you saw. People didn't want you to try cases because they didn't think juries would like you. And in fact, women didn't even serve on juries till the 50s. So, I mean, you're thinking this is just 25 years later, so how can a lawyer be, you know, convincing the jury when really women hadn't been on them that long? And it was, everybody always congregated at the courthouse. It was wonderful. And so on Fridays, that's where everybody was. But you would be looked at as to what you were wearing. I mean, there was no question that you were
pants?
oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, you know, it was hard to know what to wear. And so then if you would stand up, I mean, you were just looked at. We were different. You were a big change. And it was very exciting. I mean, it was hard, but it was very exciting to be coming in with a wave of kind of fellow women who you really admired, who were really experiencing the same thing and trying to make your way.
Did you know from the beginning that your group was likely to be critical mass, that you were going to be likely to move forward as far as you all could take it? Or did you come to that realization as you practiced along for a few years?
Well, we really connected quickly. And once again, you know, we were all different ways. Like Marietta and Aleda and Barbara had all had other careers before they decided to go to law school. And then there's me, you know, like I was like plowing through undergraduate and law school, you know, without the benefit of having a career really like they did before we got started. But we all knew that we were working hard, and we all were so supportive of each other. It was just never a question of being competitive. And that's really kind of the culture anyway in Nashville, about women working together, and men too, for the common good. If you're kind of a complainer, nobody really wants to be around you. Yeah. So I don't know, I think we evolved because we were very focused on making sure we were doing or finding our own confidence or finding our own legs. But we evolved quickly into understanding that we could be a force.
Talk just a little bit about your very earliest clients and cases. What stands out?
Well, I had a fantastic career at legal services. The caliber of the lawyers there and the trust that they had in me, just being so young and wanting to push the envelope a little bit, was amazing. And it makes you really understand how important that support is to lawyers. But I started out in family law, and it was terrific because I was up on my feet in court every single day. So unlike a lot of lawyers today who, say they go do trial work or litigate, and, they don't even know when they're going to see the courtroom for the first time, I am out of law school and I am over there representing low-income, poor people, people on welfare, as we called it then, and learning about their lives and learning how difficult their lives are through the family law process. And I did that for a year, and then I went to the consumer section. And but the first year that I was in the family law section, I was so struck by how you either go to jail, and a man usually loses his job, or they're garnished and their wages are they can't afford to live themselves. So I decided, taking my legislative background, that we were going to go to the legislature and we were going to institute wage assignments for child support. And I went over to Vanderbilt Law School and I looked at every single state to see if they had a wage assignment, and looked how they did the law, drafted a bill, and made sure alimony wasn't in there so it wouldn't be controversial, and it passed. And so before there was ever any federal law that mandated that, which came about a few years later, where every state had to do that, that passed in Tennessee, and that was just a perfect example of having gone to the legislature and kind of knew what it took to pass, knew how to draft a bill, and figuring out this is not working. This isn't helping the guys, this isn't helping the gals. And that really got me going, as far as gave me a lot of confidence at Legal Aid.
So just continue down the road of your practice. Did you develop specialties? What was your next step or stop along the way?
Well, before I left Legal Aid, I'm going to try to make this kind of fast, but
it's important.
I had a client named, she would love for me to tell you, her name was Bertie Boyd. And she asked me to come over to do a will. And I went to her house and she came out with 11 insurance policies. And she said, "Can you tell me what I bought here?" And it was called industrial insurance. And so I, of course, thought, now this woman's retired and she has to be at a manufacturing plant in order to get this, because it was called industrial insurance. But then I started reading it and it was all this life insurance, and she had all these different policies. So I had another client and she had 29 policies and she was on SSI. So I asked Ashley if we could have a grant from Legal Aid, and I hired 2 law students for the summer, and we investigated the industrial insurance companies and learned that it was National Life and LNC was selling these products to all of these poor people that there was a separate statute for industrial insurance that did not give as many benefits as insurance, ordinary insurance, other insurance. And that these companies, instead of an ordinary insurance where they're mutual companies where you get back the profits as policyholders, that they had made all this money as a stock company off the backs of poor people selling them too many policies that were really not worth much. So we published a report called Poor People in the Insurance Industry in Tennessee, and went to see John Siegenthaler. I made an appointment to go see John Siegenthaler because Mary Frances Lyle was one of the law clerks. She's had a very distinguished career.
She was in my law school class.
Yeah, she's an amazing woman. She knew somebody at the Tennessean. So I went in there with this report, and he put a couple of reporters on this. And I told him, you can just go into the housing, public housing, and you'll find somebody. It's not that hard. And I wouldn't give my clients. So they published a report. So for a week, when people really read the paper on the front page on the right-hand side, they did a story every week. And when they did that, 60 Minutes was in town. And they were doing a story about fraud and taping and music business. And so they came to see us, and they did something on 60 Minutes about industrial insurance. And as a result of that, the FTC asked us to come to Washington and testify. And of course, the insurance industry always gets worried that there's going to be a national consequence versus being able to deal with each state. But I decided that we need to change our law in Tennessee. So I drafted the Small Insurance Policy Law of 1979. And there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of help from the Tennessean in getting that passed, but it passed. And then the insurance commissioner, who was a help, John Neff, in getting it accomplished and was kind of going against his own industry, he took it to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And that is because of Bertie Boyd.
That's a great story, well worth telling.
Well, anyway, but I enjoyed all the support that I had at Legal Aid, but I knew that I wanted to go in private practice, and that's why I left.
And where did you go when you decided to go?
Nothing really attracted me. And, like a firm, the environment of the firm, I didn't think I would thrive in a firm after having that great experience at Legal Aid. And I wanted to do what I wanted to do, the kind of work I wanted to do. But I wanted to be able to not be pigeonholed, into a certain kind of practice. I wanted to have a broad practice, and I also wanted to start the first women's law firm in Nashville. So I looked around and decided Mary Shipley would be a great law partner. She had recently lost her husband, and she was working at the district attorney's office in the child support division. So she had a good sense of going to court too and how to practice law. So I approached Marietta, and we were not that close, which I thought was good too. So we would bring to each other, a business relationship. And so we did it. So on St. Patrick's Day, 1980, we started Shipley and Behm.
And it was indeed the first all-women's law firm in Nashville.
It was. It was.
Talk a little bit about in the professional and political arena, what was going on then and how you got involved in those things.
Well, I really love being a lawyer, and I'm just so grateful that that is what I do for a living. And we were very lucky that so many lawyers wanted to see us succeed. So Marianne and I both represented poor people, So we did not have a client base to bring with us to our firm. But we did have the support of just so many men and women who were lawyers. And that's really how we made it. We also made it because we had been involved in a lot of community activities, you know, up until that time. And for me, I had been involved in Walter Kurtz's campaign for public defender. I had, one of my clients had come to find me on the 4th floor and said that she had been arrested for a misdemeanor for destruction of property, and her husband had done that, and they were in the middle of a divorce. And she received $99 a month, and I told her just to go down there and get a lawyer, like, you know, because she was poor, and she would get an appointed lawyer. And the public defender told her that she could not get a lawyer because she was out on bail, because she had made a bond. So I went in to see the public defender and asked him why this was their policy, and he told me that he would be glad to take her case. And then I said, well, why are you doing that? Because I ask. I mean, thank you, she needs help. And I went back to the office and said, what is this? You know, what is going on? And they told me about the public defender, and Walt decided to run for public defender, and I very much thought there needed to be a change in the office and a change in the policies. So I had known Walt through law school, and he was a former legal aid director. And through that process, many lawyers got involved in that. And it was a big upset because the public defender had been there for 20 years. And that was part of the whole 60s civil rights, all of us coming out of law school, getting to know each other. He was kind of, you know, a great beacon to follow, and we were able to put all of that to good use. So the organization of that had brought together a lot of friends. And then I had decided that the YMCA downtown should be no longer just men going to it. And that happened because Chris Norris asked me to file a lawsuit so she could go downtown and exercise with her husband after work, John. And I said, I just thought strategically we got to think of a different way, because I thought a lawsuit would go on forever. So we devised a strategy whereby, this is so fun, 5 of us went down one day, and 4 of them were clerks of judges, 2 of them Supreme Court judges. And the judges said, yes, you can put down my name as where you work. So the strategy was, we went in there and we said, we want to join. They said, of course you can't. We asked why, because they said, you're women. We said, we would like to leave our name and number, you know, and where we work. And by the way, 50 other women are coming next week and asking. And they did. So they took down their name and number, and we worked with them, and 18 months later, they had a place for us to go. So it opened. And 2 women, Mary Schaffner and Juliet Griffin, lawyers, headed that effort. So we were doing a lot of things. I mean, we were creating a lot of change. And so when Mary and I started our firm, there was just a lot of support to try to see us make it. That was kind of what was going on at the time.
Were you active in bar organizations in your early years of practice?
We were, and you know, there was I was on the Nashville Bar Board in 1981 to 1984. We had strategies about who was nominated, and if you were nominated, how you got elected, you know, and trying to get a woman on the board, because there were very few women who had been on the Nashville Bar Board at that time. And then we also organized LAW, Lawyers Association for Women, at that time. And you know, there was a lot of discussion about whether you need a separate bar association for women or not. That has been a huge success, and it was a good thing to do. But we had a 900 square foot law office, and we had this library that was about 100 20 square feet with all those big old bookshelves in there, and we'd all pile in there, and we organized LAW out of that law office. We organized getting a lobbyist for the Tennessee Women's Political Caucus. We had National Women's Political Caucus meetings. We had Barbara Haynes was the first woman to win countywide against an incumbent, and her 1982 race was out of that. That little office practiced a lot of law, but it also dealt with a lot of social change too.
You've talked now about several events, and I think you consider those as sort of seminal events in both your career and in how the Nashville legal community changed. Why are those the most important things that you remember?
Well, you know, I think I just love coalitions for change, and I love lawyers, and I love getting together with people to do that and strategizing. But, you know, I don't want to take away from how much what Mary and I did in those first 3 years as lawyers either. She still maintained a really strong family law, you know, practice. But I decided that I was going to broaden my practice, and so I took discrimination cases, and you know, they were hard cases because the two in particular I remember, one against J.C. Bradford, a reported case, Scales versus J.C. Bradford, in which a woman wanted to be a municipal bond trader, and she wasn't able to do that, and that went up to the Sixth Circuit. We had several other cases I took against banks or DuPont or whatever, men and women, but mostly sex discrimination cases. And you know, we didn't have a large staff. We maybe had sometimes 3 or 4 lawyers, and you know, you can take a lot of resources against a plaintiff's lawyer, and obviously I learned a lot in those cases about how to be a lawyer and what's a good case and what's not a good case. And I did a lot of bankruptcy work. I was a bankruptcy trustee, so that I could get my commercial lawyer kind of bona fides going, but still in court a lot. And so what I found myself doing was telling people what kind of cases. They would say, well, what kind of law do you practice? And I would tell them what I wanted and not necessarily what I was doing. And but we were able to make a good living, and we were able to get past those early years where you wonder if you're going to make it or not, and have a good law practice.
In 1990, with your significant help, Marietta Shipley was elected a circuit judge in Davidson County. How did your law practice transition after that?
Well, Harlan and I decided, I had Margaret in 1986 and Harlan in 1988, and we had decided that we were supporting 2 different law firms, and as much as I liked having the identity of being in a women's law firm, that I felt like and he did too, that we wanted to practice law together. And so we formed Dodson, Parker, Behm, and we had a couple of different partners, and we've had Donald Caparella as our partner for a long time now. And so we've been doing that for 30 years. So we started our firm in 1988. So by the time Marietta decided she wanted to be judge, she was part of that, obviously, and then she took on an incumbent, Harry Lester, and as far as I know, I think she was the first woman to be an incumbent circuit judge, maybe in the state, because I don't know. I know a lot of people are getting appointed. You got appointed in '89.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think she was the first to actually defeat an incumbent.
And so that was kind of hard because, you know, nobody thinks the incumbent's going to lose, first of all. And so you have to figure out how to raise money, and the candidate can't raise money. And so you had to find a really good treasurer, and Bobby Thomas was that, and he was at Bull Cummings at the time, and he was a great supporter of Marietta. So she took him by surprise, and she won.
I want to spend the rest of this time talking generally about your service and acknowledgement in the community, in politics, in all those areas. I want to start by asking a required question. Have you been involved in any military service?
No, I have not.
Then let me move on to just ask you, maybe first to talk about politics and political involvement in the broad and specific senses, because you've always been actively involved in good government, in trying to get good people elected to all kinds of offices. So far you've resisted the temptation to run yourself. Tell me about your love for politics at all levels.
Well, that's a great way to put it. I think I don't think politics is a dirty word. I really strongly believe in civic engagement and the importance of it. And I very strongly believe how important it is to have good people step up and put themselves out there for service. And for some reason, Harlan and I just have a knack in understanding what it takes to get elected. And so what we have been able to do, and we obviously love doing it together, and we do it separately too, is offer advice without charging for it, because we're lawyers, we're not political consultants as a career. And that allows people, kind of the freedom, if they trust the advice. I know obviously they get lots of advice from other folks too, to go off and do things like that, so that they can have a career and can toss it around a little bit. And so it has been very fun to be a part of politics, and for people who get elected, if they're mayors or if they're state representatives, we don't ever lobby. We have never lobbied, so we are not a government relations firm. We just like to watch good people surprise people maybe and get elected, or not surprise people and keep getting elected because of their good service, and have somebody that they can talk to about what's going on without feeling like that person's going to ask them for something. I think that's real important too, that they can trust political advice, and the person who's giving it to them is not making money off of it.
Give me some examples of the engagement you've particularly had in campaigns. And you don't have to name the candidates if you don't want to, but sort of the level. Did you start with Board of Mayor and Alderman or City Council member? What are the campaigns you think about the most?
Well, I've already mentioned Walter Kurtz's campaign. I started out as the sign coordinator, ended up being campaign manager, as people just kind of fell off and you had to do that. But that was a countywide race, and I was 27. But I have to say that Harlan was telling me what to do, and I was smitten with him, so it was pretty easy to, get together with him and figure out what to do. And then in '82, there was Barbara's race, and of course the Haynes are just amazing people. And in that race, she was taking on a General Sessions judge named Sutton, and he had said some really bad things from the bench, and she'd only been out 5 years, but of course she'd been legal secretary for a long time, and she and I, on a napkin in the federal courthouse, decided that she was going to run. Her law office burned in the middle of the campaign. It was quite interesting. She was a fabulous candidate, And after that, things kind of slowed down because of the way judicial system is. You know, judges work every, you know, they only run every 8 years. And so I do remember there was one campaign where Ann Lacey Johns was appointed by Governor Carter. And so I decided that we just needed to have a fundraiser where we would raise $15,000, which was a lot of money in '87, and we would have like 30 or 35 women agree to either give $300 or raise it. And that, what would that mean if we just showed all these women were for her? I mean, that was kind of a different thing, but we did, and all the General Sessions judges stayed out, and she ran unopposed the first time after she got that money. So there was a lot of strategy about that. There was you and me going to the 1988 Democratic Convention.
That's right.
And had a strategy with the governor and what to do, and you got appointed after that. And then Mary's race. So in the 80s, there was just trying to get some traction, to get some women appointed in election because there were so few. But then there was an initiative they started in the Metro Council because we didn't have any women, and it was called 1 out of 40 is not enough. And then 4 years later, it was called 5 out of 40 is not enough. And then 4 years later, it was 11 out of 40 is not enough. So, you know, so that there were, and they had to take on incumbents because there weren't any term limits up to your race in 2014, where the Supreme Court was under attack, and unfairly so, in a retention race.
So what is Save Our Courts?
SOS, that's Bill Purcell's. He said, you know, he and I were talking upstairs and on a Saturday morning, and he was as concerned as I was. And he says, Margaret, on the way here, I've come up with a slogan. I said, what is it? He says, SOS. And I said, okay, Save Our Courts. And that's what
It may actually have been Save Our State.
Save Our State.
I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, Save Our State, right, right. So we were involved with that too. So, you know, and right now I'm involved in the Carl Dean campaign with an effort called Core 54. I've gotten kind of tired of being women for somebody because we are a majority of the voters. We're 58% of the voters in Davidson County, 54% in Tennessee. So that is the Core 54 shows our strength.
So I want to test you, but require you to answer these next questions. Because if we talk about everything you've participated in individually, it would take us a long time. But I want you to start by telling me all the leadership roles you have played
Right.
in boards, commissions, bar associations, sports activities, which also is a passion of yours.
Well, let's see. I can't help but just go to sports because I like sports so much. I'm a sports fanatic. So in 2008, I was asked by Vice Mayor Diane Neighbors to co-chair with her the Women's Final Four and trying to get it. And then, you know, the actual tournament, that was such a fabulous experience. And we went to the NCAA in 2008 without a convention center hotel in the middle of the recession. And because of her connections and Mayor Dean's commitment, we're able to get the Women's Final Four. And it was held in 2014, which was really the showpiece for Mayor Dean when he opened the convention center, and it was just a few months after that, and that was the first big event that occurred in Nashville. And through that process, we had to raise over $1 million, you know, to put on the Final Four. It was very fun to get a lot of people in the city to be so behind women's sports. And we had a lot of committees that raised the profile of women's sports, women in the media, some legacy things with girls and mentoring and really great speakers. So leading up to that was fabulous, and it was a great event, and I'm very glad I got to be a part of it. After that, I have been part of what is called a Women in Sports Committee with the Nashville Sports Council, so that we can keep that momentum going, trying to raise the profile of women in sports. And I'm on the Sports Authority now, too. I've been doing that for 8 years. So.
And what is that authority responsible for?
It's really actually the landlord for the city-owned properties. So it's the stadium, football arena for hockey, Sounds Stadium.
A lot of things.
Now, hopefully MLS.
That's not the only metro organization that you've been connected with, is it?
No, I have been on the Metro Health Department. I was with that for 10 years. And I also, as part of my law practice, I really very much enjoy the municipal work I've done. So for over 15 years, I have been general counsel for the Metropolitan Transit Authority. And then just a couple of years ago, I decided not to continue to go through the RFP process with MDHA, but loved my time as general counsel with MDHA for about 15 years. So I love that public policy part of what we're doing in Nashville.
And you've assisted Nashville in other ways too. Talk about Celebrate Nashville.
Well, that was, we've had a long, fun, Harlan and I, friendship with Mayor Purcell. And he asked me to be one of 3 people who were chairs of celebrating Nashville 200th anniversary for that year during his administration. So I called us the Mod Squad. I'm often asked to be the white woman, and there's a black male and a white man on a committee. And that was a similar thing. Like, I was the white woman of the 3-person committee. But I was honored to do it, don't get me wrong.
No, I understand.
Mod Squad being, for anybody who doesn't know, a show many years ago with an African-American male with a big afro, a white woman, and a white guy who were detectives. And it was very popular.
Yes. But there are many community service organizations that you have served as well.
Yes, I was Girl Scout leader for many years. Been on the Girl Scout board, very active in the YWCA, domestic violence and its advocacy, Rotary, a lot of different boards that I've really...
Legal Aid Society.
Legal Aid
Didn't
Society.
you help them raise a little money?
Helped them raise some money, and I was the first 5 years of Tennessee Justice Center's existence. I was their treasurer, so I was there trying to get the money. And yeah, there have been quite a few community organizations that have been important to me.
And then there's some state organizations that you have served as well. So talk about the Judicial Selection Commission.
Well, well, of course, I'm very interested in judicial selection. I'm sure you know that.
I do know that.
Yes, and
I'm
also
grateful.
just by what I've talked about and getting good judges. So when we were with LAW, we did a lot of strategizing about how can we get more influential, how can we get more women. Part of that was before the Judicial Selection Commission, in 1990, there was the Appellate Court Nominating Committee. And so the governor appointed the Supreme Court. The Appellate Court Nominating Committee actually did a merit selection type of process for the appellate court, intermediate appellate court, and then all the trial judges were selected by the governor. And everybody had to run. So there were no women on the Appellate Court Nominating Committee. So we had this strategy. So the strategy was we would determine when the middle district seat came up that one woman would run, knowing there would be several men, and we would see if we would get a seat. So I ran for that. I won by 2 votes or something like that. And so I was on the Appellate Court Nominating Committee, and then we also had the speakers appoint some women. So by the time I left the Appellate Court Nominating Committee, there were four women out of 11 on there. So we had made some headway. We were running for these seats and whatever. But then they decided they were going to change the whole process in 2004, and they, with which is a whole nother discussion for another
Yes.
day. And the legislature then passed the Tennessee Judicial Selection Act, I guess, or something comparable to that. And so we were having a whole new commission. So all that work that we had done to have diversity, like boom, here we were again, starting with a whole new commission. So a group of us worked to have a statute put in that, put in a clause that mandated that the representation of the Judicial Selection Commission reflected the population of the state as to gender and diversity. So the first commission came out, there were 15 people, there were 8 men, 7 women, 3 African Americans, and it was a very diverse commission. I was appointed by the Speaker of the House, and I was its first chair. So there were a lot of meetings through the years. I stayed on there for 10 years, probably part of over 100 judges being recommended to the governor for appointment, and it was really, truly was a fabulous experience.
Today, neither the Nominating Commission, Selection Commission, or any of its successors exist. They ultimately were repealed by the legislature. And so the merit selection that we have now is dependent on an executive order issued by the current governor, Bill Haslam. What, if anything, do you have to say to the next governor about whether that should continue or not?
Well, that's a great question. I think merit selection is extremely important. I think, though, that what is missing now is diversity of political party and gender and race. So if I was the next governor, I would suggest that your executive order make that commission be diverse. The Appellate Court Nominating Commission had the political party difference in it, that requirement. That was scrapped, and only the gender and race was mandated. But even then, the speakers did not follow that statute, so that by the end, it was not even. So I would, since the governor has the ability to appoint that commission, I would make it diverse in many different ways, not just on gender and race, but also political party. I think that works best.
And another place where you were an inaugural chair is the Access to Justice Commission, created by the Supreme Court in 2009. Talk just a little bit about your experiences there.
Well,
you are literally a lifetime of seeing and crusading for access to justice.
Well, I can really thank my legal aid experience at law school and then legal aid, coming out in the 70s for that. Just being so interested in the way systems work and the barriers that are there. And I love to think about systems and whether we just remove the barriers or we go around them, frankly. And so I was honored to be asked to be the first Access to Justice Commissioner by the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court, this was in 2009, I served for 3 years, they asked for 2 strategic plans. It was a lot.
That was
but
mean,
it really, mean, yes. But I think it really made us work hard. But I think the Supreme Court was very wise because they chose people, there were only 10 people, so it wasn't a really big commission. And they were not embedded in the community itself, but very, very dedicated to the concept of access to justice. And so these 10 people, we had to figure out how to organize them, we had to look at the system, we had to figure out how to make these changes. But it was something that I loved doing, and it was a terrific commission. I mean, dedicated, hardworking, court totally involved. What I learned about our court was it was the only court in the nation that all 5 members were dedicated to access to justice, had made it its #1 strategic priority, and there was no other court anywhere in the United States that had made this such a top priority. So with that kind of support, we kind of had a lot of momentum. and it still does to this day, still issuing strategic plans, still tracking how many lawyers are giving that kind of service. It's been very successful.
So what other one or two particular organizations have we left out that we should mention before we move on?
In the community, I feel like you've covered everything.
Well, good, because now we're going to move on to the question that I expect to have the hardest time getting you to respond to, but I'm prepared to help you if I have to. Though you don't do any of this seeking the limelight. You do it because you believe it's right and because it advances one of your core principles or values. But other people do recognize you for who you are and what you do. And so you have received the top awards of virtually every organization, especially legal type organization, with which you've been involved. I want you to name those.
Oh, you mentioned mean earlier. Well, I think probably the biggest surprise ever to me was in 1992 for the ABA Margaret Brent Women's Lawyer of Achievement.
And explain what that is.
Well, it's given to 5 women nationally each year who have achieved something in the legal profession that they think is worthy of note. And the year that I got this award, Hillary Clinton had been the chair of the ABA Commission on the Status of Women, and they were running in '92. So she was the speaker. Anita Hill had just been through what she went through in the Clarence Thomas hearings, and so she was there. I sat next to Patsy Mink, who, to me, I had a wonderful stint for 6 months in Hawaii between undergraduate school and law school, in which I went over there and was carefree, trying to imitate my mother going to Europe, I guess, or something. And I love Hawaii. So I was really familiar with her. She couldn't get into med school, so she went to law school. And, of course, she's the author of Title IX and many other things. Supreme Court Justice, who was amazing, out of Georgia, and a Ninth Circuit judge and a scholar professor at Bolt Hall at UCLA. So I got this award because of Julie Jones, who was at Bass, Berry & Sims, a fantastic lawyer, because she wrote something about me for this Athena Award that we have here, that very wonderful award that cable now puts together. So she just submitted this. She submitted it. That's what happened, because she submitted that. And whoever was on the, nominating committee chose me. And so I get this call, and I really think it's, I don't know, it's a joke or something, but it's like I'm really taken off guard, obviously, and it was really very special. And obviously didn't feel it was deserved, for the company you're keeping. I suppose I was the private practice person or something. I really wasn't sure what my category was. But that was very special to me. And but I have
let's go back to Julie Jones' nomination of you for Athena, because she was successful, or you were successful in winning that award too.
Right. And Sissy got it the first year and I got it the second year. Now there are 30, 35 people competing, and I had great competition. There were 9 and 10 of us at the time. And she and I still attend those awards together every year. She's truly an inspiration to all of us, as you know. And I'm talking about Sissy Daughtry. I'm sure most people know I'm talking about Judge Sissy Daughtry. So, but I have gotten, I have gotten the John Toon Award, which meant a lot to me. It's the National Bar Association, the David Rutherford Award regarding professionalism. John Toon was actually a cousin of mine, and Harlan's father has received that, and Harlan has too, so that means a lot to our family. And there is a Hall of Fame for the Tennessee Justice Center, and a Women's Hall of Fame, and So some recognition regarding access to justice that I have appreciated. So there's a Martha Craig Daughtry Award too from LAW.
That's right.
So, it is.
But wait, let's not forget the Cable Promote Women Award, the YWCA Academy for Women of Achievement induction, the Tennessee Economic Council on Women Hall of Fame. So they really run the gamut. You've been recognized for work in many different areas.
None of this ever happens, though, unless there are all these people who are who are working with you and passionate about the things that you're passionate about too. So it's hard to talk about awards when so many other people are involved in making all these things happen.
I know. Well, let's talk just a little bit about today and moving forward. So, what things are you working hardest on now? What activities or what legal matters are really your passion right now?
All right, well, you really can't tell anybody this.
I won't tell a soul. They'll have to check out the video and watch it later.
Yeah, so I am so excited about this. So I am working on a room at the library similar to the Civil Rights Room that commemorates the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment and Nashville's role in this story. Because without Nashville, without it happening just 2 blocks from the library and at the Hermitage too, it might have taken 2 or 3 decades for us to get the vote.
And for the historical record, in summary form if possible, talk about the role of Nashville and Tennessee in the passage of the women's voting right amendment.
Yeah, unbelievable in the sense that it was down to Tennessee. None of the other southern states had ratified the amendment. Delaware was supposed to, it didn't. And so all the forces came to Tennessee to try to keep women from getting the vote. Headquarters were at the Hermitage Hotel. It's a very dramatic story. And in fact, the Senate passed it. But when it got to the House, one vote, it won by 1 vote. And the legislator, Harry Behm, was going to vote no, and he got a letter from his mother who asked him to vote. She was concerned because she hadn't heard that he was voting for it. And the letter is very famous, but and he changed his vote. And that's why you and I can vote.
Tennessee became the 36 out of 48 states and succeeded in the ratification.
And the story is dramatic. I mean, there was racism that was playing a part that makes you sick when you read about what was happening in that regard. The railroad interests were against it. The liquor interests were against it. What was said about women and why they can't vote are things that are said, similar to what we hear today about why we can't do things.
And what year was that?
It's the 1920s.
So we haven't moved yet 100 years beyond that. We're approaching that.
There's just a lot of similarities that, it's good for us to know. And, of course, the suppression of voting rights, which we see so much today, the ambivalence that, the United States has about whether people can vote and people who retain power wanting to keep other people from voting. I just got back from Australia, and they're required to vote, everybody, and they're fined if they don't. That is not the culture we have in the United States of America. So, the whole women's role in suppression of rights and the programming that will take place, like taking place in the Civil Rights Room, is a long-lasting legacy, which, I'm so excited the library is willing to do that. And So I'm involved in raising money for it and the content that will go into it. It's very exciting. I'm very excited about it.
It is. Do you have any longer-term projects that you particularly have set out to do? A bucket list of anything?
You know, not really, except, you know, I'm still very interested in promoting women in sports. I would love to see a women professional soccer team here. There are things like that that we as women have really come a long way, no question about it, but there are so many things still left. Quarter of a century ago, women made up 4% of the media coverage of women's sports. It hadn't moved. That needle has not moved at all. So, you know, I love what I do, and I love all the opportunities that I have as a result of all the changes that have been made. But there's a long list left of things that we can do to make things better.
I hate to use the R word, but retirement maybe in your future, is in most people's futures somewhere. Tell me how much you've thought about that, what that will look like if you ever decide you are going to retire from the practice of law, from community activities. What do you see your future looking like, short-term and long-term?
I will not retire. It's a simple thing to say. I get up every morning, I get in my car, I love coming to work, I love being a lawyer. I love my clients, I love working with them to fix their problems. I really love who I work with. I love younger lawyers. Obviously, Harlan and I are still practicing together. That's a great situation for me, for both of us. I do so many different kinds of work. Still, I think that's why I still love the practice of law, because I'm not specializing in one thing. For me, having real estate knowledge and corporate knowledge and employment law knowledge and litigation knowledge and all of those different things, estate planning, you know, really gets me excited about coming to work every day. And I have a I'm so fortunate that I work with Felicia Outen, who's my paralegal for the past 20 years, Lisa Woodruff, who's been with us for 37 years as our office manager. I mean, I don't know why I would ever retire. I'm in great health, thank God, and you know, it would take my health to keep me from coming to work.
The rest of us are very glad to hear about that response.
I love what I do.
So I want to move toward a final question, and of course, because it's me, it's going to be at least a three-part question, and then you know that you have the opportunity to add on to that whatever you want. But it's this, essentially. When you are not here any longer, or first,
no.
since you're not retiring, as you think now about your own career, what do you think are the most important things that we should remember? So that's part one.
About what?
About your life, your career, your values, about you, the things you don't like to talk about.
Oh, Lordy.
That's part one. Part two is, how do you think you'll be remembered by your peers? By those who came along about the time you did, who worked with you in all of these things for a number of years. And part three is, how would you like to be remembered? How do you think you will be remembered by those who followed in your footsteps?
Oh, God, I don't even know if I remember what you said in part one now.
That's okay. What do you want? What do you think you should be remembered for?
You can just take each one.
Okay, all right. So we'll start with, what are the things that mean the most to you? What are your top three pivotal events or values? You don't have to talk about individual things, but what do you think are the most important things you've accomplished that you'd like to be remembered for? Specific or general?
You know, I've never thought about this.
I know.
You do know that. What do I think? Well, I do think that I helped people get confidence, particularly women, to do what they should do. What I sometimes sensed that they could do that they didn't know they could do. And you know, I have people come up to me and say, you just said this in passing to me, you know, and I really thought about it. And do you think I can do this? And, you know, women need a little bit more encouraging than guys do. And that's another story. But, you know, but I know that, and I know it's important to spot that in people, and then if they want to do it, if I can help them, I'm glad to do it. I've learned that I can't say something like that unless maybe I'm willing to help out. But I'm glad to do it. So I think that's probably it, just encouragement and helping people have confidence. And of course I can see where they've gone with that. That means a lot to me. What
would you like to be remembered for among your peers in the law? What do you think you will be remembered for? If you're asking somebody who's known you since law school or just after and has shared a career through all these years, what do you think they'll say about you? Well, as a lawyer, I think it's important to me to have been a lawyer who's capable, there's no question about that, but who always was cognizant of the importance of our profession and professionalism. If I have to answer this, since I have to answer this, I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Obviously, you want to be a capable lawyer, but that's not really, it doesn't, you know, that doesn't quantify integrity, professionalism, how you indicate to your colleagues how much you respect them and appreciate them and what they do. I love the professionalism of lawyers. I, you know, taught a class at Vanderbilt, not the past year or two, but before that, about practice and professionalism, really trying to explain how much that really adds to your life. You know, what it means to be a professional. And, you know, you can have a job, but it doesn't mean you're a professional. And there are just so many great lawyers in our town who are professional, and I'd like to be remembered as one of them. There's a single thing that I've heard numerous people say in introductions of you or speaking about you, and it's identical every time. When Margaret asks, I say yes. Or Margaret can make me do whatever she needs to. But what causes independent, I guess I'm just assertive, intelligent, and busy women uniformly, when asked about your influence, to use that term? That's an indicator of great respect and great credence. Well, you know, if I ask, I really don't want to waste your time. I mean, I'm not going to, I hope, waste your time. I just think it's really important, and, you know, I also think you're going to think it's worth it. And I also think you're going to have a lot of fun doing it. Because you know, nothing is going to get accomplished if it's torturous. So when you ask, I think it's almost, I would like to think it's more like, this is going to be worth it, and I'm going to be glad I did it, and I'm going to have a good time doing it with whomever is part of it. You know, that's what I think it means. And so the last part of that multi-part question is, what do you hope will be said about you, and what do you think will be said about you by those who are not your age or experience peers, by the next generation, the folks who have followed you, they've looked up to you, they see you as a mentor or role model? What are they going to say about you? I don't have a clue. I don't understand millennials. Well, what do you hope
mean
they'll
that.
say
I don't
about
mean that
you?
in a negative way. They don't, my kids are millennials.
Most of
They're
them also
terrific.
say, if Margaret asks, I say yes. So they're
Yes.
developing some idea.
I don't think it's just me. I think there is a group of us, and this is the way I would answer that. I think there was, and we're still around, thank God, most of us. I think there's a group of us who really loved blazing a trail. And it wasn't just blazing a trail because we were trailblazers. It was because we really enjoyed each other. We really were passionate. We had a great time getting to know each other, And I think that if people in making change today could just understand that part about the relationships and how fun it is and how long-lasting it is, and plus you get to see the fruits of your labor and how worth it is. It's not like you're just, we make sacrifices, but it's so worth it.
So is there anything else, having asked hard questions that I didn't necessarily tell you about in advance, how do you want to end this conversation?
Well, I want to thank you. This has been like going to lunch and we've just talked and talked and talked, and we look at our watches and then we realize how much time has elapsed. And I want to thank you for your friendship. And you've made this much easier than I expected. So thank you for being part of this, Kenny.
Thank you very much. I think we're done.